Hey everyone, welcome back to the EarthX TV stage here at EarthX 2025. I am your host, Dylan Welch, and we have an amazing guest joining us today, Grant Wilson, the Executive Director of the Earth Law Center. Grant, thanks so much for being here today.
Hey, it's great to be here, Dylan. Before I start, I got to give a shout out to Joni Clark, who introduced me to the EarthX community and is someone you got to talk to if you're in town here.
Shout out to Joni, there we go. Well, tell us a little bit about what you're working with the law. I know you mentioned you're helping the faceless, the voiceless. So how did you kind of start and get into this, and what are you currently working on at the Earth Law Center?
Earth Law Center works to give nature a voice and rights in the legal system, which is very different than the status quo in which nature is defined as property or a thing or a resource. And our kind of premise is that can we really solve the environmental crisis if our relationship with the natural world is just one of its owner? And I got into this space because I was interested in wolf conservation, and wolves had just come back to my home state when I was about 18, an intern at this group for the first time in 80 years. And I was like, yes, nature can restore itself to health. That's so cool. Then I read in the newspaper a couple weeks later, someone poached one of these first wolves to come back to the state, and they found it because they tried to mail this bloody box, and they opened it up, and they're like, what is this? And it was a poached wolf from the lookout pack. And that really made me think, like, why is there this humans against nature mindset, us versus them, when really we're all part of nature? And we know we're all part of nature, but the law does not say that. So my quest at Earth Law Center and as a lawyer is for the law to reflect the reality that humans are part of a complex ecosystem and we all deserve a voice.
Well, thank you for that. They need that, we need that. How did you get into this? Were you always, was your goal always to be a lawyer and then kind of focus on environmental law? I know you obviously just shared that story, but tell us a little bit about your journey, from being in law school to being a lawyer to then focusing on this environmental impact.
Well, I grew up in the Pacific Northwest, and I first got into environmentalism because my dad was a journalist, an investigative journalist. And he did this big series for the Seattle Times, which was amazing, uncovering how chemical industries were illegally putting toxic waste into fertilizer to dispose of it. And then it was being spread on fields and in eastern Washington, and there were all sorts of health effects. And not only was it poisoning the community, but also poisoning nature. And I think I realized then that humans are part of nature, we're not separate from it, and what we do to nature, we're really doing to humans as well. But there wasn't enough focus on nature's own unique interest in this conversation. And in fact, I learned that to even go to court to protect a forest or a river or a mountain, you can only do that if a human interest is harmed. And that's called standing. A human has to have standing to go to court. But if a forest is harmed, it can't protect itself for its own sake. But I learned this was starting to change, and that there'd been legal precedent developing where, hey, nature can actually represent itself in law. And I wanted to be part of that and have done so as a lawyer for over 12 years. And I wrote the law school course book on the topic with others called Earth Law, Emerging Ecocentric Law. And I've worked with governments and indigenous peoples and communities all over the world to think of creative ways and innovations to give nature a voice. And I can talk about examples at some point.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, I want to ask about some examples, but what is it like day-to-day life as an environmental lawyer? Are you in the courtroom? Are you passing laws? What does it kind of take behind the scenes to make this action happen?
When I started about 12 years ago, there's some sitting around bored a little bit, like, all right, who's going to email me to give nature a voice? What's going on here? But now it is so drastically different, where there's an immense wave of interest from national governments, subnational governments, local governments, community activists, because they understand the status quo is not working. Oftentimes they'll ask us to work on laws. For example, a couple years ago, we worked with a 26-year-old lawmaker in Panama named Juan Diego Vasquez Gutierrez and a group called the Leatherback Project, and provided some counsel on how rights of nature could work in Panama. And that was drafting a law. It got passed, and now rights of nature cases are being heard in that country. Nature has a voice. So a lot of it is drafting new legal frameworks. But we also advise governments. We advise agencies in the United Nations. We work in the Biodiversity Treaty. And actually internationally, there's something really, really cool happening, which is that sustainable development has kind of always been the goal. I think that's cool. Sustainable development is great, but of course we're going to develop. That's kind of just assumed. But there's this new vision kind of emerging, especially through the Biodiversity Treaty, which is harmony with nature as a global standard. And that's something we consult on too. What does it mean to live in harmony with nature from a legal perspective? So we work with international organizations on that. And then the last thing, we educate a lot. We have a law school course book. We have a summer course. It starts June 2nd. You can register online and train up lawyers in different areas of law about how they can expand their practice to represent nature in some manner.
So there's a lot going on at all times.
Holy
basically.
smokes. Holy
So
smokes.
what's your favorite part? What do you enjoy the most, especially as you see it coming together? Is it the education side? Is it the international side, dealing with different countries and cultures? Is it passing these laws? What gets you most excited while you're working on it?
I get really excited supporting frontlines communities and giving them a stronger voice. And just an example, Peru, an amazing country, has this river called the Marañón River, which begins in the Andes, the peaks of the Andes Mountains, and flows through this canyon that's twice as deep as the Grand Canyon, and then into the heart of the Amazon, where it feeds the Amazon River. And it's this amazing, amazing river with pink dolphins and giant river otter and the Marañón poison frog. And it suffers from oil spills. There's lots of oil spills on the river. You see the pink dolphins washing up on shore. And of course, as I said, we're part of nature, and it harms the communities that live alongside the river as well, that bathe in the river, or sometimes not if it's polluted, use it for drinking water and so forth. And there's an amazing leader named Mariluz Kanakiri, who for decades has been fighting for this river's health. And she brought a court case to protect it in Peru. And our lawyers and other legal advocates from Instituto de Defensa Ambiental, from International Rivers, provided support to say, here's how this could work in a rights of nature framework, giving the river actual legal rights. Like, could that turn the tides? And sure enough, there was a landmark court decision. The court said this river has a right to flow, a right to exist, a right to be free from pollution. And not only that, but these indigenous women, Kukama indigenous women, who have long spoken for the river culturally, were now amongst its legal guardians. Like a child has a legal guardian, they now spoke for the river. And it was a huge, huge judgment. It held up on appeal, and Mariluz, who I mentioned just a couple days ago, won the Goldman Prize, the Nobel Prize of Environmentalists, for her efforts.
Yeah.
And providing just lots of people supported her, but being part of this ecosystem of support for people like her to give the river a voice and empower its defenders is just very, very meaningful for me.
Yeah, that's amazing. Are there any things that maybe the average person would be surprised to hear about the law and how it works with the environment that you can think of?
Oh yes, lots of interesting
I'm
things.
Sure.
One that I think, if you've heard me talking so far and you're like, oh, this is kind of like very radical environmentalism, we're actually innovating in corporate law as well. And we worked with the first company in the world called Faith in Nature. We supported them along with another group called Lawyers for Nature. They're a natural products company in the UK, and we worked with them to put nature on their board of directors. And we worked with a huge corporate law team that was pro bono, otherwise it would have cost like $200,000. Huge corporate law team to be like, is this even legal to put nature on a board of directors? And in the UK, in this case, they said, well, yes, board members have a fiduciary duty to promote the long-term success of the corporation. And that's not just quarterly. Like, we need to be looking maybe multi-generationally, and companies that are successful in the future are going to be those that align with the rhythms of nature, that respect natural boundaries, that engage in a circular economy. Those are the corporations of the future that are going to thrive, as I believe, when there is an environmental ethic that is stronger amongst people worldwide. And so they said, let's do it. Let's put nature on the board. And in the last 2 years, they've had one or more proxies speaking as nature in the boardroom. They vote on stuff. They, voted to move away from plastics and towards recyclable aluminum, for example. But they said more than anything, just like having nature's voice in the room has been very powerful. We're listening to nature as part of our company. And I think that's something any company could be interested in. If it's not a board seat, what about an advisory body where nature's voice provides advice on something? And So the surprising thing here is that really any area of law can be reimagined to give nature a voice. Just one 10-second example,
Yeah.
family law. Typically it's about children and divorce proceedings, let's say. But in laws that create appointments for guardians of children, you can change the word child to nature and all of a sudden use family law concepts to represent nature in the courts. And additionally, there's indigenous peoples who believe, let's say, southern resident orcas are relatives to the Lummi people in the Pacific Northwest. Can family law be used to protect relatives of indigenous peoples, their kin? So there's all sorts of creative ways that you can apply some of these concepts, and there's innovation happening all over the world.
Yeah, I love that. Well, thank you for using that innovation for good, and congrats on those big successes as well. Grant, thank you so much for joining us on EarthX TV. Let's give it up for Grant, everybody.
Thank you.
Yeah.